Okay, the next item of business is a statement by Angela Constance on response to fatal accident inquiries, deaths in custody. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of her statement, therefore there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on the Cabinet Secretary up to 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In January, I set out a range of actions to address the systemic failures identified by Sheriff Collins's fatal accident inquiry determination relating to the tragic deaths of Katie Allen and William Lindsay, also known as William Brown. And I am grateful to have had the opportunity to meet with their families once again today. The commitments I made then form part of a new approach in relation to all deaths in custody. Official statistics published on Tuesday linked data on deaths in custody with death records held by the National Records of Scotland for the first time. They show that around 30% of deaths in custody in the decade to 2022-23 were classed as probable suicides. Whilst every single suicide is a tragedy, the data takes us a step forward in improving transparency and understanding the causes of deaths in prison custody. And this progress is crucial as we work to address the issues surrounding the safety and well-being of those in custody. Presiding Officer, the formal response from Scottish Ministers and the Prison Service to the Sheriff's FAI determination was published on the 13th of March. All the recommendations were accepted, with specific responses to each recommendation, referencing completed work to date and setting out where further work is required and when that will take place. I expect this work to be delivered at pace, and I will be closely monitoring progress. The SPS has initiated a dedicated operational task force chaired by the Chief Executive and involving NHS partners to ensure that all recommendations are actioned. And this will be underpinned by a delivery framework with biannual updates. In January, I emphasised the critical importance of independent scrutiny, and I am pleased to report that terms of reference have now been agreed with His Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons for Scotland. The Chief Inspector shares my view on the need for rigour and transparency in this work, as well as the need to involve families, prisoners, SPS staff and expert advice. She expects to provide me with an initial report on progress by the summer. Presiding Officer, on the introduction of a national oversight mechanism, I am grateful for the early engagement we have had with a wide range of stakeholders on the options available, and that will continue as we finalise the model and establish a plan to implement it. At its core, the national oversight mechanism will provide accountability, transparency and drive systemic improvement, informed by evidence and analysis, and crucially will be independent of government. In terms of scope, consideration will be given to widen that to include all deaths that occur in the care of the state, not just custody. Key functions will include annual reporting and the ability to audit existing FAI recommendations, for example. Regarding the broader package of measures, I am pleased to be able to report that progress has been made. I visited Polmont last week to see firsthand a team committed to action at pace and applying learning. SPS has removed all bunk beds from accommodation that might be used to house a young person at Polmont. In addition, an instruction has been issued to governors to ensure all establishments that accommodate young prisoners conform to the same standard. All rectangular doorstops of the type identified in the FAI process have been removed from Polmont. The policy on possession of items that can be used as ligatures is being revised, and a pilot of the ligature audit toolkit has started. In addition, signs of line technology will be piloted with Polmont, and where the evidence shows that it works, we will support the Scottish Prison Service to ensure it is implemented. Presiding Officer, at the centre of Sheriff Collins's recommendations was the need to overhaul the SPS suicide prevention strategy. Talk to me. Professors Graham Towell and David Crichton have been appointed to lead the evidence phase of this crucial work. Both professors are forensic psychologists with a speciality in suicide prevention in prisons. They have both held senior roles with the Ministry of Justice, and Professor Towell was called upon as an expert witness at the FAI of Katie and William. This work represents a commitment to real and lasting change, and their initial work will be completed by the end of the summer. SPS will overhaul their strategy in tandem with the evidence review, so it will be ready to publish at the end of this year with a full training package to be implemented in 2026. Presiding Officer, for some, the first 72 hours in custody is the most challenging. Sheriff Collins recognised this in recommending that Talk to Me be applied to all young people during that period, and this will be a key part of the revised strategy. I was able to discuss in detail with the Governor at Polmont the enhanced measures and additional staff resources which have been put in place in the meantime to ensure any new admission will be placed within dedicated observation cells for the first 72 hours and will not be removed from observation thereafter until it is safe to do so. On the issue of bullying, I am clear that prisons must be safe and rehabilitative. SPS must address harmful behaviour and foster a culture of respect and safety. SPS has accepted that their anti-bullying policy, Think Twice, has not been effective and will draw on relevant external expertise to develop a new strategy this year. Presiding Officer, particular to William Lindsay's case, the FAI heard that information available to the court was not shared with the SPS. This was unacceptable, and the inconsistent practice around the transfer of information from courts to custody needs immediate resolution. The Scottish Government is therefore leading work with relevant partners to ensure the consistent transfer of relevant information between courts and the prison service. Once concluded, Justice partners will be required to fully integrate the revised processes to ensure a seamless transition of information between court and custody. In January, I set out a commitment that all death in prison learning and audit reviews would be chaired independently. I can confirm that a non-executive member of the SPS board will now chair all reviews on an interim arrangement. This ensures that these reviews are independent of governors and prison staff whilst maintaining continuity and momentum. However, SPS will undertake an open and formal recruitment process over the summer to appoint a formal chair. In consultation with the Lord Advocate, I have commissioned an independent review of the FAI system to focus on improving the efficiency, effectiveness and trauma-informed nature of investigations into deaths in prison custody. It will also identify specific barriers families face in engaging with the process and propose concrete solutions to shorten timescales. I will provide Parliament with an update on the appointment of a chair, which I expect to be able to announce shortly. We have made good progress in developing a draft remit and ensuring the review is well resourced so it can start work immediately. On the issue of legal aid, I committed to making legal aid free and non-means tested for families involved in deaths in custody, FAIs. This will ultimately require primary legislation, which, given where we are in the parliamentary session, will be for a new Parliament. However, I do not want families to wait for this important support, so I will be using existing ministerial powers to ensure that from Monday the 7th of April, close family members involved in deaths in custody FAIs will have access to non-means tested legal aid. We will also put in place additional support services for families and introduce a new family advocacy role. Engagement has already begun with families to ensure our approach is shaped by them. This will ensure that families have independent trauma-informed support and guidance following the death of their loved one. Presiding Officer, we have made progress since January. I want to assure Parliament that we will continue to drive forward change and strengthen accountability. This is about changing the system and the culture that underpins it. In closing, let me once again extend my deepest condolences to the families of Katie Allen, William Lindsay and all those affected by a death in custody. It is through ongoing and decisive action that we will create the lasting change that they rightly demand and deserve.
Thank you. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in her statement. I intend to allow around 20 minutes, after which we'll need to move to the next item of business. And I'd be grateful if members wishing to ask a question, haven't already done so, would press the request to speak buttons. Call first Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of her statement. And I acknowledge and welcome that all of Sheriff Collins' 25 recommendations relating to the tragic and preventable deaths of Katie Allen and William Lindsay have been accepted. There is clearly, though, a desperate need for action without delay to prevent further tragedies. And whilst I recognise the progress that the Cabinet Secretary has just reported, can she firstly, on the record, make a commitment today that all the recommendations will be implemented urgently and within the timescales set out in the report? And furthermore, I recall from January's statement that the Cabinet Secretary committed to pursuing the UK Government with a view to removing Crown immunity. Can the Cabinet Secretary therefore provide us with an update on any discussions she's had with the UK Government since that statement? And finally, the Cabinet Secretary gave a very welcome commitment to make legal aid free to close family members in tragic cases such as these from the 7th of April. But we all know the legal aid system is currently in something of a crisis, with lack of funding and indeed legal representatives. So how is the Cabinet Secretary going to ensure that she urgently addresses those issues such that families who find themselves in such tragic circumstances get the legal aid, but are then also able to get the representation that they deserve?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank Mr Kerr for his acknowledgement that we have indeed accepted all of the recommendations. I've always been very clear to this chamber that accountability starts with me, and I will pursue everyone, not just within the justice portfolio, but whether that's right across government, to the very best of my abilities, because it is desperate that we need action and we can't have any more delay. It is fair to say that some of our aspirations and some of the recommendations, given the depth of work, they won't all be completed by a week on Tuesday, and that they will require sustained endeavours over the next year. In terms of Crown immunity, I did write to the UK Government in mid-January to the Secretary of State, the Ministry of Justice. I've not had a response. I will, of course, be considering other means to pursue that meeting with the UK Government. I do want to have that meeting. I think Sheriff Collins' narration of the issues in and around Crown immunity and the history of it were powerful. In terms of legal aid, I have committed to bringing forward primary legislation that would provide for the non-means tested legal aid for families participating in deaths in custody FAIs. And that would include non-means tested advice and assistance from day one. That is what requires primary legislation. I can't deliver that right now, but in terms of right now, and I am very conscious that ministers will have to support in terms of resource by finance or by personnel in terms of implementing recommendations, but the ministerial direction that will come live from the 7th of April will enable families to get civil legal aid from the point that they are notified that there will be a fatal accident inquiry.
Pauline McNeill.
I'd like to wholeheartedly welcome the commitment the Cabinet Secretary has made on non-means tested legal aid for close family members. I called for this at the last statement. I'm delighted the Government are going to use the powers to make it happen as soon as possible, with further powers needed further on. I also welcome the transparency that we're trying to achieve in deaths in custody and the appointment of chairs who can be independent of the Scottish Prison Service in deaths in custody. The removal of bunk beds at Polmont and the progress towards the removal of ligatures are really important to prevent more deaths in custody. But does the Cabinet Secretary agree that the State has a responsibility to keep prisoners safe while serving a sentence? In too many cases that we haven't. Does she further have concerns about Addywell Prison? There have been 14 deaths since the tragic death of Jordan Burns, who took his own life, and also Lewis Spence, where the family have expressed concerns about the running of Addywell Prison. Families must be given full and unfettered access, as promised by HMIC. I wonder if the Cabinet Secretary will look into those matters.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And Ms McNeill is quite correct to state the importance of transparency. Transparency leads to accountability, and accountability leads to action, and action leads to change. And let me unequivocally state that the State has responsibility to keep those in their custody safe and well. In terms of her point with respect to HMP Addywell, colleagues will be aware that SPS manage the contract, and then when things perhaps don't go well, or additional assistance is required, or additional support, is the prison service that ultimately will step in. But her point about families having appropriate access, whether that is to services or personnel within HMP Addywell, or indeed to His Majesty's Inspector of Prisons in Scotland, are important points, and I will take those away and address them directly.
McGregor, to be followed by Ross McCall.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I wrote to the Cabinet Secretary earlier this month and also last year, and therefore I know she'll be aware of the case of Jordan Burns, a 22-year-old with a history of significant self-harming during his 10 months as a remand prisoner at HMP Addywell. Sadly, in November 23, Jordan was found dead in his cell, having suffered an overdose. As our constituents MSP, my office and I have had ongoing contact with Jordan's mum, who has experienced unimaginable grief. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that the fatal accident inquiry should be expedited so that the family can be given the answers they need? And with a case like this, can I ask what steps the Scottish Government are taking to ensure there is confidence that adequate systems are in place to protect prisoners in such circumstances and reduce the likelihood of similar instances occurring in the future?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, can I acknowledge the correspondence that I have indeed received from Mr McGregor on behalf of his constituent, and of course my thoughts continue to be with the family of Jordan. Every death, whether in custody or our communities, is a tragedy for all those who know that person. Mr McGregor may wish to raise the issue around the timing of the FAI with the Lord Advocate directly. What I can speak to is that the actions set out in our response to the Sheriff Collins fatal accident inquiry, I hope shows a commitment, whether it's from SPS, whether it's from the Scottish Government, to learn lessons and to make improvements, and to do so at pace. I can point to that the Talk to Me policy is currently being overhauled. There is the development of suicide prevention technology, and that work has been accelerated, and all NHS boards have given assurances that prison referrals to the mental health team are immediately reviewed and acted upon without delay. But we all, of course, want to give scrutiny of all these actions to ensure that they are indeed implemented.
Okay, I recognise the extreme sensitivity of the issue we're debating here, but if I'm to get every member in that wants to ask a question, the questions themselves will have to be briefer, as indeed will the responses are called. Ross McCall, to be followed by Audrey Nicholl.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. With the worrying findings that the fatal accident inquiry found, the information available to the court was not shared with the SPF. Given the shift towards placing young people in secure accommodation, what assurances can the Cabinet Secretary give Parliament that the same information sharing issues will not arise within these secure settings so our young people actually stay protected in that environment?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, in many cases, I think the sharing of information is probably the single most crucial issue, because people can act without full knowledge and full information, and therefore I have to make a call on both the NHS and colleagues in the community, and indeed the prison service, that we must find better ways to share information and to do so timely. There is work that the Scottish Government is leading on this. I think we now have all the problems and all the gaps have been identified. The problem is well and truly on the table, but we now need to crack on and get it solved, and solved once and for all.
Audrey Nicholl, to be followed by Paul O'Kane.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's clear from the Cabinet Secretary's statement that the Scottish Prison Service Talk to Me strategy needs overhaul. So I very much welcome the update provided, indicating that the strategy will be reviewed. Can the Cabinet Secretary provide some more information on the review and in particular some more information about the experts who have been appointed to take it forward?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, as I said in my statement, Professor Graham Towell is leading the evidential stage of this overhaul. He is a prominent academic expert in forensic psychology. He will be supported by Professor Crichton, a consultant forensic psychologist. Both professors have held very senior forensic psychologist roles within the Ministry of Justice and are experienced in working within custodial settings. They have, of course, published some of their work, and crucially, they will independently review the Talk to Me strategy and make formal recommendations to the prison service, based importantly on wider stakeholder engagement, including with those in custody, but also with their families. And the new policy will be based on the best available evidence.
Paul O'Kane, to be followed by Rona Mackay.
Thank you very much. The acknowledgement that the anti-bullying policy, Think Twice, has not been effective was quite clearly outlined in the report, and the Cabinet Secretary has referenced it. A new strategy, of course, is welcome, but can she say more about exactly who will be involved in shaping this? How will families who want to be involved in that process be included and heard? And what assurances can she give right now that families' loved ones are safe in custody?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I hope it is of some reassurance that there is an acknowledgement that the anti-bullying strategy needs to be also overhauled, and that there will be, I can say, a new strategy this year. That will be informed by independent expert advice, and the point that he makes about the involvement of families is absolutely crucial. I am deeply mindful of that, and in terms of his third point, which is just, I'm very sorry, the concern line. So I just wanted to point to the installation of a 24-hour concern line for families to be able to contact the prison service, but also the work to explore and expand on the use of in-cell telephony and how that could enable loved ones to be able to contact external agencies or other support within the prison.
It's an acceptable intervention from a sedentary position, Mr O'Kane. Rona Mackay, to be followed by Maggie Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise what technology there is on signs of life that has already been considered and assessed by the Scottish Prison Service? Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, there is a short life working group on the technology. The technology also is looking at, or SPS, forgive me, is looking at the commercial companies who have undertaken some work in the new HMP Highland and the HMP Glasgow projects. They have also engaged in with Heriot-Watt University, who are actively exploring research opportunities in this area and seeking funding from research bodies to further develop their work. Given the unique challenges of the prison environment, there isn't a single solution, but I do want to make the point that we should grasp the opportunities available to us from new and emergent technologies, but technology will never replace human-to-human contact.
Thank you. Maggie Chapman, to be followed by Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, and I extend my sincere condolences to the families of Katie Allen, William Lindsay and all those affected by death in custody. The Cabinet Secretary spoke of the enhanced measures and resources that have been put in place for the first 72 hours in custody, acknowledging that this is often the most challenging time. She mentioned observation cells and the overhaul of the Talk to Me suicide prevention strategy. While the overhaul of Talk to Me is happening, what will be done to actually help and support those in the observation cells, as well as observing them? And are there any other recommendations about Talk to Me that can be implemented immediately?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, there is a commitment from me and the Scottish Prison Service that all those recommendations in the fatal accident inquiry determination that made recommendations in and around Talk to Me will indeed be implemented. What I can say to Ms Chapman in terms of the here and now, the actions that I outlined to care for young people in those first 72 hours in custody or or beyond, that is in place now. There is additional staff resource put in place now. There are enhanced measures to ensure that those new admissions can be looked after in dedicated observation cells, and that they won't be removed from those arrangements until it's safe to do so and until there has been a case conference.
Alex Cole-Hamilton, to be followed by Claire Hawkey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, family after family have been let down by Crown Office, and I pay tribute to those of them represented in the gallery today and thank them for their bravery and their persistence. And year after year, we've been told things will improve, changes will be made, but still there are unforgivable, agonising, long waits for these families, adding to the torment they are suffering. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, on the independent review of the FAI system, why not ask it to consider removing the responsibility from Crown Office altogether, move it into a separate system, learning from the coroners elsewhere in the UK, because surely the Cabinet Secretary can see that Crown Office has shown itself incapable of handling these.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I do appreciate that Mr Cole-Hamilton has very specific and strong views on this matter. There are aspects that he would narrate that I would share. Families are undoubtedly waiting too long for fatal accident inquiries, and that's why, in response to the trauma associated with delays, that I have commissioned an independent review of fatal accident inquiries focused on deaths in prison custody, and I do hope to be in a position to announce the chair very soon, and I hope that that demonstrates my commitment to families impacted by death in custody, that we are trying to move this on and that we will move this on. I appreciate there are wider issues in and around fatal accident inquiries, but my focus right now is to deliver better efficiency and better trauma-informed care for families impacted by death in custody.
Claire Hawkey, to be followed by Sharon Dowie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. According to statistics published by the Chief Statistician this week, there were 345 deaths in prison custody over the period 2012 to 13 to 2022 to 23. What work is being done to ensure deaths in custody are prevented in the overall prison estate?
Cabinet Secretary.
It's an important point, Presiding Officer, and the work that is commencing is about developing detailed pathways from the point of admission to liberation and through care that ensures individuals have access to interventions and support, and the right interventions that supports their well-being. Ms Hawkey may be interested to know that SPS and Public Health Scotland are collaborating to gain a better understanding of the prevalence of long-term health conditions in prison, which are more common amongst the prison population compared to the wider community. So combining this work with the implementation of the FAI recommendations, that will help ensure individuals have access to targeted preventative health and wellbeing interventions.
Sharon Dowie, to be followed by Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Recommendation 7 is the only one addressed directly to ministers and is about the fundamental issue of ensuring that SPS have access to all information about a young person, including mental health assessments. The Government admit in the response that there have been systemic failures across agencies in this. They are setting up a working group to look into this, but there is no information on when this will report or what will actually be done. Can the Cabinet Secretary make a commitment on when it will report by? And also, in her last statement, the Cabinet Secretary committed to speaking to the new Chief Inspector of Prisons about ensuring more unannounced inspections take place. Can she provide an update on this and what action has been taken?
If I can say to Ms Dowie, I have indeed met the new HMCIPS and I will indeed meet with her again. I think there is a point well made around unexpected inspections. In terms of the information sharing, I'm not going to repeat what I said to Ms Dowie's colleague Ros McCall earlier, but if I can give one example where we are actively improving information sharing just now, and that's around the improvement of healthcare IT, and that's very important for clinical purposes in terms of access to the right information at the right time.
And Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I offer my condolences to the families and friends of Katie Allen, William Brown, and also Jordan Burns mentioned this afternoon on the tragic loss of these young people. The Cabinet Secretary spoke about the detailed conversation about advanced measures and assurances that she has had regarding those first crucial 72 hours in custody. Can the Cabinet Secretary provide more detail on how recent action goes towards reaching some of the recommendations from Sheriff Collins' determinations?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I don't want to incur your wrath, so I'm not going to repeat what I've said in previous answers around our work to overhaul Talk to Me, or indeed some of the work to enhance self-safety through the anti-ligature risk assessment tool that is being developed, and that will be rolled out as well. But if I can just say to Ms Adams, I will be expecting all stakeholders involved in this journey to be providing me with regular updates, and I will make that commitment to Parliament in whatever shape or form Parliament wishes.
And finally, Douglas Lumsden.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary mentioned sharing information between courts, NHS and SPS at the time of person admission to prison. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, will she also confirm the sharing of data will take place at the release of somebody from prison? Because this sharing of information could have saved the life of my constituent Alan Gerris, who was murdered by someone who had just been released by prison just hours earlier.
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, and I very much appreciate Mr Lumsden's engagement on this issue. I had the privilege of meeting his constituent, Ms Sandra Geddes, with respect to the death and murder of her beloved brother, and I will keep the member updated in terms of the progress around release planning and through care support. But the point that he makes about the sharing of information when people come into custody is equally applicable when they are liberated.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes this item of business. There will be a brief pause before we move to the next item of business to allow front benches to change.